Namaste. On behalf of Chairperson Ms. Shubhra Maheshwari and her committee, I, Gunjan Sundhi, Honorary Secretary FICCI Flow, would like to extend a warm welcome to our eloquent and articulate guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji, distinguished past chairs, and esteemed members. We would now request everyone to please rise for the national anthem. I request the photographers to refrain from clicking pictures during the national anthem. AV team, national anthem, please.
जन गण मन अधिनायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता पंजाब सिंध गुजरात मराठा द्राविड उत्कल बंगा विंध्य हिमाचल यमुना गंगा उच्छल जलधि तरंगा तब शुभ नामे जागे तब शुभ आशीष मागे गाहे तब जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय
I request our guest speaker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji, and Chairperson Ms. Shubhra Maheshwari, Ms. Hina Srivastav, Ms. Lekar Lahoti, Ms. Monica Agarwal, Ms. Sona Chatwani, Ms. Jyotsna Angara, Ms. Rekha Reddy to please join us for lighting of the lamp.
No.
One mic cam, please, sir.
Okay. Right. Done.
Sir, please, sir.
Just a second. So one.
Second. You are here, everyone.
Done? Thank you, sir.
Requesting our illustrious guest, Dr. Shashi Tharoor ji, and Chairperson Ms. Shubhra Maheshwari to grace the dais. Requesting Ms. Shubhra Maheshwari to felicitate the honorable guest with a flow memento. Requesting Chairperson Shubhra Maheshwari to address this august gathering.
Good afternoon and a warm welcome to everyone. Before we begin the session, I would like to take a small moment to speak about and remember our Beloved YFLO past chairperson, late Ms. Shakuntala Devi, Flo and YFLO, we deeply regret and grieve the passing of a dear friend, a mentor, advisor, and a pillar of our fraternity. She will always be loved and cherished in our hearts and will be missed dearly. Gone a bit too soon. I would request we all observe a moment of silence to pay our respects to Ms. Shakuntala Devi. In the words of our esteemed speaker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the only possible idea of India is that of a nation greater than the sum of its parts. And today, standing at the midway of my term at Flow Hyderabad, as we complete 6 months, we all truly believe that this is as true for India as for Flow and the team who's working here. All of us have come far in these 6 months, not only achieving milestones and accomplishing a lot, but learning in the process of building bonds, fostering creativity, and continuously progressing towards giving back to the society. Success is a journey, not an end game. We are done with 8 offline speaker sessions in 6 months, 3 online sessions, 5 financial literacy sessions for our members, financial literacy for women being the theme for the year, 1 field trip to ATC, innumerable initiatives to help the grassroots women, a mega exhibition style Tatva with 230 vendors, 7,000 plus visitors, and a Royal Rajasthan retreat with 100 members. This is also a record at Flow Pan India. No other chapter has taken 100 women ever for the retreat. I'm delighted to announce that our chapter this year has added 200 new members to the Flow family. We are today at 1,000 members, a very beautiful number, making us one of the largest and most vibrant Flow chapters in the country. All this could be achieved with the strong guidance of the past chair sitting right here, constantly guiding me, my sponsors who have supported me, a very hardworking and dedicated committee, and the enthusiasm of all you members. On this occasion of completion of 6 months, I am extremely elated to have with us Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the man of many talents, a scintillating personality, an author par excellence, a thinker well ahead of his time, in conversation with Mr. Sriram Kari, resident editor at Deccan Chronicle. Thank you so much, Mr. Sriram, for joining. 7 years back, Dr. Tharoor, when I heard your speech at the Oxford University, I was mesmerized by the strength of speaking unabashedly about the British on their soil with facts and figures on fingertips that could send a chill down every Indian spine. If somebody has missed that speech, don't miss. Please go on YouTube and do have a look at it. Hats off to you, Dr. Tharoor. Truly, your knowledge, education, and grit is admirable. Infectious is also the word that can be used here. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor, for taking out time for us in your busy schedule. On a lighter note, since morning, I'm engulfed with hippopotomonstrosesquipedaliophobia, which is the fear of long words. Trust me, 6 months of my journey, I have never been nervous before any event, even if it was the first event, but today I am nervous. So let's keep it light and can't wait to hear it straight from you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Shubhra. Requesting Ms. Nanda Rao to introduce the illustrious speaker, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and Charles Suri to introduce the moderator, Mr. Sriram Kari.
Thank you, Gunjan. Namaste. It's not easy to introduce a person who is already so well known, whose reputation precedes him, that of an effective orator, a statesman, and a prolific and respected author. Sri Shashi Tharoor was born into an Indian expatriate family living in London, but soon returned to India. He completed his bachelor's degree from the University of Delhi, and in 1978, members, can you guess when Sri Tharoor was awarded his PhD? Anyone? A wild guess. Everyone has been doing a lot of reading about you. And at the age of 22, He was awarded a PhD from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. At that time, Sri Tharoor was the youngest person ever to earn a doctorate from the Fletcher School. Later that year, he became a staff member in the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva, Switzerland. During his 23-year career as a diplomat in the United Nations, he served in various capacities. Sri Tharoor resigned from the UN in 2009 and joined the Indian National Congress and contested the elections to the Lok Sabha from Thiruvananthapuram, Kerala. Soon after, he was appointed as Union Minister of State in the Ministry of External Affairs and later was appointed as Union Minister of State in the Ministry of Human Resource Development. He is the author of several fiction and non-fiction books, one of them being Tharoorosaurus, he being the wizard of words. He shares unusual words for every letter of the alphabet, laced with fun facts and anecdotes behind the words. I'm sure all our combined vocabulary is still no match to that of Sri Shashi Tharoor. And after hearing him, we will want to scripturient, a strong urge to write, I'm sure. Thank you.
Afternoon. Sriram Curry is an English language novelist, writer, columnist. His novel, The Autobiography of a Mad Nation, was longlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize, although his first book was The Spiritual Supermarket. It was also longlisted for the Crossword Book Award. His next novel, One Farmer Less, is awaiting publication, and he's presently working on his next non-fiction anthology, How to Defeat Modi's BJP. I guess the name itself is a bestseller. He is the co-founder of Hyde Park, which is an independent speaking platform, and he's also led communication and branding initiatives at ISB, Call Health, Infosys, TCS. His writings have appeared in the Asia Times, Economic Times, Huffington Post, BBC, Guardian, Dhaka Tribune, Scroll, amongst others. He is currently serving as the resident editor of Deccan Chronicle Holdings Limited. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Nanda and Charul, for these wonderful introductions. Well, we have Mr. Sriram Curry with us on the dais, now requesting Ms. Shubhra Maheshwari and Mr. Curry to take the session forward.
Sriram sir, one more sir. Thank you.
It's organization, so we'll begin with a women-centric question, Dr. Tharoor. More women in India are taking up leadership roles. We are seeing women everywhere, but boardroom diversity is still not enough. It's slow. So what do you think we should do to quicken that pace in our country today?
And you mean across the world, not just
Yeah.
in companies,
Correct.
politics,
Across.
in every field?
Yes.
It's uneven, as you know. I mean, there's certainly areas in which women have thrived and excelled. Whether their numbers are enough is very, very difficult to say, because arguably with women you are drawing from a smaller pool of available talent. Not that the talent isn't evenly distributed, but because of cultural and socioeconomic reasons, a lot of women aren't available to join the workplace in the same way. I just, in fact, one of the things I had to cancel but ended up recording a detailed Q&A for when I began my political campaign here was a huge gathering called Women in Business in Kochi, organized by another entrepreneur's body. I'm not sure it was Flow. But in any case, the idea that women need special attention is something that we've all had to acknowledge. Whether it can be in terms of a government policy or legislation is the next step. For example, I raised a question in Parliament a couple of years ago when I noticed that there is a law on the books that mandates every single public sector company to have at least one woman on the board. But at that point, when I raised the question, something like 73% of them did not. And no one had bothered to pull them up for it. Now, the fact is this because they don't care? Is it because women don't care enough to say, listen, one of us has got to be there and I'd like to apply? Is it because the government doesn't care enough to implement the law and pull up companies that aren't doing their job? No one knows. But the fact is the actual numbers speak for themselves, and we need to stir up greater interest in that way. If you look at other kinds of things, for example, entrepreneurship, women entrepreneurs have tended to do just as well as men, and by some metrics even better than men. If you look at the success rate of startups involving women, it's incredibly impressive, and in some cases it's better than those of men, except there are very many fewer examples that you can choose from. The other interesting thing is that many women startups tend to be much smaller than male startups because the women don't get enough money to start with. Now, these are the kinds of challenges which go beyond simple issues of merit or numbers or balance and get into cultural factors, hidden biases, and sometimes a certain reluctance on the part of women themselves to push themselves forward, all of which make a simple answer to Shubhra's question very challenging. All I will say is, I genuinely believe in all my work experience, which has been sadly a bit too extensive, that there is absolutely no respect in which women in any profession are deficient to men in any profession. In many ways, they are often more conscientious, more reliable, less easily distracted, and therefore more productive. And therefore, this moves beyond the conventional stereotypes that the professional world has had to deal with. And I think somehow what we have to do is bust some of these myths. We have to create an ecosystem that permits and encourages more women to participate in the economy and to rise, and in business and professions. And we also have, I think, where necessary, to support them with government policy and laws. That's a very broad statement, but I think that sums up the big headlines of what I think we need to do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tharoor. And in this note, I would also like to bring to everybody's notice that on similar lines, Flow National has brought to us Women Directors course, which a small course which equips you to be the directors on various companies' list. But sadly, the participation, even from Flow members, is really less. So go back, read that message. We'll have it broadcasted once again, and contact the Flow admin office in case it interests you. But please do, because it will give you another perspective to the industry, a lookout at the industry. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to be here at the FLO session, and in more ways than ever before, I feel totally overwhelmed. A session with Dr. Tharoor per se is a pleasure by itself of a different kind. It's like, it's a hard job, but it's also easy job. It's like going to bat with Virat Kohli. You're the other batsman. Nobody wants you to take much of the strike, just take a single, give it back, and he'll do the rest kind of a thing. It's very easy per se. But Shubhra ji, for all her kindness to invite me, give me a lovely memento, and it's there. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, the man, the mission, the statesman, and conveniently removed the word politician. So my brief is not a single political question to you at all. And
that's a relief.
But, there's a way sharks swim in the ocean, and there's a way hyenas go about doing their job. And in a way, I'm proud of being a journalist in the context. Before any other industry, media has achieved over 50% of all staffs in all newsrooms are women across the country, digital, TV, online, print, etc. So it's a women-dominated domain, and we come and live in fear of our bosses all our lives. So we're pretty compliant. So the first question, because it's FLO and because Dr. Shashi Tharoor, and because normally men are not allowed in this session, and ever since I shared it on social media that I have an opportunity to do this conversation, every boy, man I know has said, you have to ask him this question. Dr. Shashi Tharoor, what is the secret of your charm with women? I mean, every Indian wants to know. The only other person who will rival him perhaps is Shah Rukh Khan. What is it about you? I mean, don't say it should be a vocabulary because impossible to
No,
acquire.
no, I would also add to it, we have done film events also, but no, the amount of personal messages I've got today. Shubhra, can I get one solo picture with him? One? I didn't get that even for the film events that we did. So hats off, it's clear.
Thank you all very much. But listen, I think you have to ask the question to those you are telling. You can't ask me to tell you what they think. Ask them. They'll answer it. No, but jokes apart, there's one very simple rule that most Indian boys would benefit from learning from early, which is treat women with respect and they will like you. Our fellows too often don't know how to just look seriously at the other person, listen to what they're saying, and value it for itself. I think we tend to see each other through too many perceived stereotypes of gender, and when those come in the way, you don't really relate to the person across from you.
Except the charm doesn't work with some women in politics. I mean, the British Queen, of course. But no, I'm sorry, Shubhraji, I remember your warning. I'll be a good boy. So let's get on to business. And some strains of the thought have already been kind of sown here. I'd like to really get down into the roots of understanding business and some cultural patterns in which India behaves vis-a-vis patriarchy, vis-a-vis family-owned business, etc. Recently, we saw Mr. Mukesh Ambani, the biggest, most successful entrepreneurs in this country, kind of pass the business on to next generation. Even there, I don't know how many of you felt, but I felt he gave the best to his son and not the best part of his business to his daughter. I don't know, this is a feeling I got. In a way, you know, even in family-run businesses where you give off your entire business to the next set of, children, is there a sense that the daughter is not good enough as the son, or how do we change this?
I don't know if that's entirely fair. I mean, I certainly won't speak for Mukesh Ambani, but as a general proposition, often age tends to trump gender. In other words, if somebody is older, that person often gets a better responsibility than the younger one. And as you know, there was an older brother as well as these two twins. But that apart, the other consideration very often, which perhaps works subliminally in many Indian families, particularly, I might add, the 90-odd% of India that's not matrilineal, as my community in Kerala is, that after all the daughter marries into somebody else's family, the son is always yours. And that could be a sort of subliminal or perhaps even conscious factor in influencing such choices. Culture does matter. I mean, it's very often a regular factor in influencing how such decisions are made. They're never objective. I mean, it's a bit shocking to realize that till 1956, Hindu women had no rights of inheritance in this country, unless they were Nayars or Khasis, I think. I mean, basically, they were the only communities that passed property down the female line. Otherwise, there simply wasn't any provision made, unless, of course, it was explicitly willed. So we're looking at a culture which, for various reasons, has been discriminatory towards women. I believe we've come a long way in the last 60, 70 years, remarkably long way. But I would agree with you that implicitly there's still a long way to go in terms of attitudes. You could say the same thing that we say about gender, you could say about caste. There's much less explicit discrimination. There's much more legal support for what we would consider progressive attitudes on issues of caste relations. And yet, sadly, there are still implicit in people's minds, in their social behavior, in their attitudes from, one could argue, generations of conditioning, certain casteist attitudes. And that's something which we can't entirely overcome. I think every woman will have to fight these battles within their own families as well as their own workplaces one by one. I have, however, the other side to argue is that India was in many ways a pioneer in women's rights, even if these were very few women who benefited and perhaps from a very limited social class. It's often forgotten the very first woman to graduate with a law degree from Oxford University was an Indian woman, Cornelia Sorabji. One of the very first women doctors to get a medical degree in both America and England was an Indian woman, also in the 19th century. We in India were used to women doctors before any Western, before they were common in Western societies. It's a different matter that they're now way ahead of us in all of these things, but the fact is that there was always a thin section of our society, a layer of our society, where women were privileged enough to bust through all these barriers. And so we had some of the world's first women CEOs, or some of the world's first women pilots, and of course we had one of the world's first women prime ministers. So we have had remarkable breakthroughs, and some have often said it's because Hindus are used to worshipping goddesses, so that we appreciate that women can be figures of Shakti, of authority, and so on. That could be part of the explanation, but it doesn't fully explain then why we treat such a large number of, or such a majority of our women badly. But that's a different question. I would say that there are enough positive examples we can point to as well.
And I would, Mr. Shriram, I would also like to inform Dr. Tharoor that, to my surprise, there are a lot of our members whose daughters have come in as guests to attend your program, young girls, and I was like, and why would she want to do? And they're like, no, they're very fond of Dr. Tharoor. There are too many daughters sitting here in the audience.
Welcome, daughters. The next generation has the future of India in their hands, so they're the ones we need to reach.
So I'll not do the Beti something slogan here. I'll just move on. I'd like to just ask you, just for a sense of opinion poll, if you have felt discriminated in your capacities as a professional businesswoman, has it come from legal, social context or family context? So how many of you believe it was the legal, societal construct that was discriminatory to you? If anybody believes that was the biggest factor, you could possibly do a little bit of show of hands. If you felt laws, society, they were hindering you. The other option is family, and that is a bigger problem for women rising. So who would you? So how many of you believe family and immediate circle is a bigger problem?
What Sriram saying is, first, how many of you actually feel you have experienced discrimination in your lives? Only that many. Everyone else has had no discrimination. Wow, that's an amazing number. Okay, then those of you who have been discriminated, he wants to know, is it because of laws and society, or is it because of family? So those who felt the discrimination came from the laws and society, raise your hands. Very few. And those who feel it came from the family, slightly more.
Yes.
There's your answer.
So there's very little we can take it forward in terms of there's nothing he can do as a statesman, politician, parliamentarian, except in appeal to the better sense and wisdom in the family, etc. I would like to take this whole question to twist it because you brought in the aspect of caste. How many of you feel proud when you hear an Indian is the CEO of Microsoft, Indian is the CEO of Google, Indian recently okay. So this is my hypothesis, and I'd like Dr. Shashi Tharoor to analyze. I feel it's a very shameful aspect. There isn't a single Indian business who's willing to hire an American, a Britisher, an Australian, a Bangladeshi as their CEO instead of their own son or daughter. We want them to be very progressive. You know how progressive was the co-founders of Google or Bill Gates or whoever, that they didn't see their son or daughter fitting in. So I'm asking you the dynasty question without bringing in politics. Are we all, I'm not going to bring politics. Are we all genetically so tied up with the idea that, everything you have, everything you build, create, it's best to give it to your own son or daughter? And no matter how good an outsider might be, he's, as you said, an outsider. Keep him away. Make sure the son or daughter keeps it. Do you think this will change? Or is it like as Shakespeare would say, a metaphysical flaw in Indians?
flaw is a good question, but you're quite right to link this to caste, because caste itself came from the notion that talent, property, money, etc., everything comes down the family tree that goes through the gene pool. And so the result is that very often, even in humble level professions, you know, if you want to be a carpenter or a potter or a cobbler, you better have a father or an uncle who will teach you how, because otherwise no one's going to teach you. We don't have enough of a culture of imparting what the British would call tradesman skills to people. It literally comes only down the family tree. And you learn because your father was born a cobbler, his father was born a cobbler, you are born a cobbler, you learn how to cobble. I mean, frankly, that is essentially a lot of the origin of the caste system. So there is, if you want, almost social cultural conditioning or a genetic conditioning or both that has predisposed these attitudes into us. And so there is a lot of this passing things down the family tree in our professional world. But I would like to argue that it's gradually breaking up. Certainly the more modern company or corporation employs people of vastly different backgrounds. We're seeing that the business world today, I mean, after all, one of the interesting discoveries for many was when a magazine 4 or 5 years ago did a cover story on the first Dalit billionaires. And many hadn't realized that, in fact, Dalits are not just looking for affirmative action in government jobs. They are Dalit entrepreneurs who've broken through and succeeded in their businesses and made money for themselves, and in a sense have bust through the handicaps that birth gave them. Now, when it comes to women, yes, there has been traditionally a feeling that women have certain roles in our society. But again, many women, by breaking free of those roles, have changed the expectations, right, of what's possible. It was, what, 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, that Air India flew an all-woman crew on a flight, I think, because the captain of that flight wrote to me about this, and I tweeted it at the time, because it seemed to me such a remarkable achievement. And there aren't too many airlines that even have enough pilots on board to have an all-woman crew take on a major flight. This was a 16-hour flight to San Francisco, I believe it was, from either Delhi or Mumbai, going over the North Pole. So all I'm saying is, yes, we do have, but how many of those women had women pilots up the family tree? Probably none. And therefore, the argument would be that there have been changes and that we are changing as a society. We should encourage and applaud that change. All societies evolve, and there is no reason for us to be so completely contented in our old ways of doing things that we resist evolution. We can evolve, we can change.
So that's a wonderfully positive note. All of you should reflect on it and also give him a round of applause. Very positive. In a sense, he's reiterating the belief. Go ahead, please. I won't feel bad if you clap loudly for his answer. So, in a sense, they say this will be the Asian century. This will also be the century of women, truly, and across the world at different levels. It obviously can't be a uniform empowerment of women in any society or across the globe at the same time. But it's so amazing, it's so positive. I'd like to, again, like I said, I'll stay off the P context, but I'd like to ask you another personal question, and this is something of great value to all of us in the sense you go about telling us your secret. All of us, I mean all of them as business leaders, me in my profession, Shubraji in her work, we all face criticism, and these days it comes very freely and easily on social media. You say something and people who don't know you, just respond, criticize. We face criticism in our personal life, in our professional life, colleagues, our family members. It's hard. I mean, think about it. It spoils your day, a week. You could sometimes be scarred for a long time when you have somebody who's... And yet I can't think of many people as blatantly, as brazenly, politically criticized as you on the media, on the social media. Sometimes these may be even absolutely baseless, but you're constantly under fire. How do you go about dealing with it?
You learn to see it. I mean, the fact is that, I've had to take an enormous amount of this, and it was quite a shock when I first came into politics. I was totally unprepared for it, because I'm a relatively late entrant to politics, as You heard from my life that I spent 29 years at the United Nations. And in those days, whenever I visited India, I used to get a gushing and fawning press. Not that I made major headlines, but whenever people did interviews, I was treated with a great deal of respect and friendship. And so I had this slightly naive idea that would continue after my return, and boy, did it not. From the moment I entered public life and politics, the P word that Sri Ram dreads so much, I found myself the object of almost entirely unfair and baseless criticism. Anything I said was twisted, distorted, anything I did. And the number of completely false and made-up accusations flung at me, it just took my breath away. Now, initially, like any normal human being, any one of us, I was shocked, hurt, depressed, worried, wondered whether I should react, whether I should sue, go to court. I consulted lawyers and they said, don't even bother, it'll take 10 years to be heard and nothing will come out of it. Don't waste your energy and time. So I didn't sue initially. Then at one point I did sue, and exactly what they predicted happened. I think some nasty comments made about 7 years ago still haven't been heard in court because it's been dragging on. So these are some of the experiences. But then one of the things I realized came to me from a story that Mr. Natwar Singh told me when I entered politics. He had gone through a rough time himself and come out of governmental office, but he had had a not entirely dissimilar experience of coming into politics, having been an Indian diplomat. So at least he was serving in India, whereas I was completely in an international environment. But he, having been an Indian diplomat, gave up the foreign service and was brought into politics by Indira Gandhi ji, and he was sworn in he remembers wearing a Western suit. So he said very apologetically to Mrs. Gandhi, Madam, I'll get a Bangala stitched. And she apparently tartly replied, no, Natwar, you better grow a thicker skin. And that, I think, is precisely the remark that came back to me, because I realized that the only way I could face up to all of this was to grow a thicker skin. And to grow a thicker skin means learning to be indifferent about things that normally would hurt you. And you begin to tell yourself a few things. Number one, that it's so unfair that it doesn't matter. Number two, that if people are going to say these things about you, best don't pay attention to them, because what they actually want is for you to pay attention and suffer and feel the hurt and the pain and the indignity. And that reminded me of another comment that was made by Kofi Annan, who was my boss at the United Nations, the then Secretary General, who used to be very fond of reciting wisdom in the form of Gane proverbs that he'd learned from his father. And I remember at one point he was under a lot of attack again, fairly unfairly, on oil for food and so on at the UN. And he told me that his father had taught him a proverb that said, when the sharks bite you, do not bleed. And I said, Kofi, but how can that be? I mean, the sharks will bite you, you'll bleed. He said, you think about it, one day you'll get the meaning. And sure enough, when the sharks started biting me, and particularly when I lost my wife, and in that time, instead of mourning with me, I was accused of having done all sorts of unspeakable, unmentionable, and to me unthinkable things. I realized that if I were to just react and suffer and show my pain, I would actually be giving satisfaction to the evil people who had maliciously made up these false accusations. And then I understood what he meant. When the sharks bite you, do not bleed, because if you bleed, they have the satisfaction. They want your blood. They're going to bite you more and suck more blood out of you. So when I went around looking, apparently, or so they tell me, largely sort of unbothered and unflappable and doing my own work and making speeches at Oxford and writing books and so on, people began to realize either there's nothing really wrong here, or that this fellow is not worth biting because he doesn't bleed. So that's the other part of the answer to the question.
Is there a word for it? Thicker skin besides that? A better adjective we'll all take.
I think the old British expression, grace under pressure, does it well.
So, actually take us a little deeper into this aspect. And what I'm trying to bring here is, all your life you've been used to what I would call judged by experts. You go to school and you write your exam paper, and the maths teacher is an expert, tells you how many you've scored. The criteria of evaluation is set beforehand and is fairly objective, reasonably objective. School, college, you get your doctorate, there are some guidelines. You work, context where, everything is reasonably clear. There is a dimension of subjectivity, of course, but you're essentially judged by experts. And you come back to India and you say, I'll go out there and reach out to lakhs of people. You have no idea on what basis they'll judge. You have no idea what the criteria is. You have no idea how to really appeal to a sense of which aspect of them, and it could differ very wildly. How is it different for you to be judged by experts and judged by common people? Because all of them, when they do business, they reach out to so many people, clients, markets, media, partners, suppliers, employees. All of them get judged differently by different. So how do you kind of go about planning?
Well, look, Sriram, first of all, it's really only in school that you have a totally objective thing of either your answers are right or wrong and you get yes or no and you get marks or whatever. And even there, in my time when there were no multiple choice questions and answers, when you actually had to write essays, some subjectivity came in. Some teacher may not like your handwriting. Some teacher might be in a bad mood one day. Some teacher might not like the vocabulary you're using, whatever. And there was a subjectivity even there to the so-called expert judging. But when you come into adult life, there's always an element of other factors weighing in on the way in which people are judging you. So let's not assume that even supposedly meritocratic decisions are totally objective. When human beings are deciding, their biases are going to come in, their preferences are going to come in, other factors are going to come in. Somebody goes off for a job interview, thinks he's done brilliantly, and is surprised to find that somebody much less impressive has got the job, and later discovers that guy was from the same caste as the interviewer, and this fellow wasn't. That kind of example. So life is unfair. And ultimately, to expect always to be judged fairly is the assumption we inculcate in our kids that is perhaps amongst the least realistic in the world. I mean, we all tell our kids, study hard, you will do well, and sometimes they discover you can study hard, work hard, and not do well, even though you studied hard and worked hard. So these are some of the elements in human existence that we somehow learn to cope with. I mean, this whole cliche of life is unfair, well, life is unfair, that's why it's a cliche. And we have sometimes to be prepared for that. Now, how do you then overcome unfairness? My answer would be you just have to go on. I mean, there's absolutely no way that you can afford to give up. And so you say, well, look, I've got this perfect product, but no one is willing to recognize it and manufacture it, or no one's willing to buy it or support it, or find an angel investor like Shubhra's husband to actually give the money to make that product. You just have to keep on persisting. At some point, you will get someone making a fair judgment. I mean, the old Robert Bruce theory of, try again. The seventh attempt, he won his kingdom back. These are things that ultimately all of us learn how to do. I will say elections. I don't think that every election is won necessarily by the best candidate, or that every election is lost because you weren't the best candidate. Sometimes there are totally other reasons, including unfair reasons, why people vote in a certain way. And when you enter politics, you have to be prepared for some of that.
So all of you, therefore, this is the kind of, a sense of what it takes to succeed in a very hostile, and no doubts, no matter how supportive you may be lucky enough to have had in family or friends or whatever, you do as businesswomen, as entrepreneurs, will face a lot of difficulties and challenges. There's criticism, there is, as you said, it's almost ridiculous to expect a totally objective, fair evaluation of your worth and selves. You will fail for unfair reasons, but be at it, keep the journey going. But did you at any point of time feel that kind of, did I make a mistake? I mean, as a global star, you could have been doing those, thousands of dollars per circuit speech and, lectures and traveling the best part of the world. And
I was doing that. I was getting $50,000 a speech, and I was, no, it's not that much. There were people getting 100 or more, but I was getting 50 in those early days, and I was obviously earning a much better life than I had. But I was never motivated by the bottom line. To my mind, how much money you are ultimately left to your kids is not going to be the hallmark of the meaning of your life. I'd always felt, somehow from childhood, this had been my feeling that the only reason we are on this planet is to make a difference, and that you measure the difference you make by the impact it has on others, not on yourself. So just making money and putting it in the bank and having a larger dollar figure doesn't, it seems to me, and I'm speaking very personally, validate your life, or at least it doesn't beyond a certain point. Yes, you want to have enough material success that your self-respect is intact. You never have to beg, you never have to ask others for some of the essentials to keep yourself going and your family going. Essentials being not just a roof over your head and 3 meals a day, but also education, some discretionary expenditure, comfortable. But once you have that, everything else is just icing on the cake. And all of us who love cake will tell you that too much icing makes absolutely no positive benefit to the cake. So I'd say that thereafter, measure your impact, measure the difference you make. And this is why, for me, at every stage, I mean, I can immodestly, I have revealed after coming back to India that in those days when I passed out of college, there were only 2 IIMs, and I not only got into both, but I came first and second, respectively, in Ahmedabad and Calcutta, and I turned them both down to go off and study international politics, because I knew that the best I could hope for with an IIM degree and a career in that kind of world would have been progressively higher salaries, and that never was enough to keep me motivated. I wanted to deal and engage with ideas and issues and themes, and the big picture questions of the world were what turned me on even then. And the same is who I am today. So I don't regret having come back into Indian politics, though it meant a 90% cut in income or in simple sort of salary and stuff. Mind you, it increased 90% or more, 900%, my ability to hire staff on a reduced income, because suddenly you have all sorts of people to do things for you at home that you didn't have in the West. So there is a material trade-off also. But jokes apart, coming into the actual aspects of life that matter, you really get to deal with issues and things that matter to people. It's immensely satisfying to me if I do things or my interventions make a difference, or I even make a speech or write a book or whatever, that people come up to me, strangers come up to me and say how much it either moved them or inspired them or changed them or guided them in some decisions they took for their own lives and their own futures. And then you suddenly feel, life's worth living because you were able to help other people to improve or change their lives. And that's something which I honestly think public life gives you, which to a greater or lesser degree offsets the frustrations. Frustrations are enormous, and a lot of what you do is not intellectually satisfying or whatever. Politics, retail politics, involves a lot of grunge work. And I have to tell you that, when I meet constituents, for example, it's not as if they all come to me with highfalutin development projects they want me to pursue, or they come to me with great policy suggestions for how to take the country forward. 90% of them will come saying, my son needs a job, and can you please help get him this, and can you call a minister and do this for me? My daughter's posted far away, can you get her transferred back here? That's the sort of thing which takes up an enormous amount of a politician's time, and no one can pretend that's intellectually satisfying. When there's a genuine humanitarian case and you're able to help the person solve it, that's satisfying. But most of these things are just what one calls constituent servicing, which you have to do because you have sought their votes and you're going to seek them again. I mean, that's the retail politics I was referring to. So doing things because they matter, a lot depends on what matters. I don't have a lot of respect for people who do things because it gets them a certain amount of payoff in the material sense. But if you feel that the things you do actually matter to large numbers of people, and sometimes changes the lives of generations yet to be born, that's something that Sri Ram's dreaded P word actually permits. I've often said to young people, and sometimes I must say, when addressing female students, I often get people saying, but I'm not interested in politics. To which my answer is, bad news, young lady, politics is interested in you. Because the decisions that politicians make affects your lives. And even simple things like, what options there are for you when you graduate from school or college, these are possibilities either enlarged or narrowed by the decisions of politicians who make laws, who make policies, who impose or lift taxes. all of these things, the environment in your country, in the economy, the kinds of circumstances into which you will graduate and live, all sorts of things. If you want people making those decisions in the best interest of the larger society, you better be interested in politics, because otherwise you will find these decisions being made by people who perhaps, are not worthy of representing you, but who've got there because you didn't care enough about politics.
So, just a clarification. The moment today morning we had our office editorial meeting, and the editor said, "Oh, you're meeting Dr. Shashi, get an exclusive, talk all politics and all that." So I'm looking forward to talking politics to him the moment we both step out. I'm like the bowler, and she is the umpire whose line I can't cross. No ball and all will come, and some sound will erupt and there'll be a free hit. So the sense I saw when he was speaking about how to face criticism, all of you were looking up with a lot of respect and, wow, yes, this is how tough I must be. I was asking him to answer a question of how he takes to people judging, and you're looking at him with equal respect. Then I saw when he was talking about this money thing, you suddenly were not earn money. So I'd like to ask all of you, option A, option B, how many of you are in business want to earn money? A, I mean, we all do everything for money, of course, but that is the primary motive. And two, how many of you believe you're working for impact? So how many of you believe you're working primarily for money?
Only two honest women.
How many for impact?
I
Of
think
course,
the
everybody
dice
wants
are
everything.
stacked.
Come on, it's like saying tea or coffee. You can't say both. I mean, sometimes you have to choose. Okay, what is that level after which you look for impact? What is the number here? Okay, awesome. Great to know that so many of you are looking for impact. So I'd like to ask him the next question and ask you, in a sense, the next question. Why are ideally this question should be asked to all of you and we should both listen, but I'll ask you to kind of, throw some options. Why are business people across the world so afraid of the P factor? Why are they afraid to criticize a chief minister or a minister or a bureaucrat? Why are they so afraid to speak? Every other segment in society speaks. Students speak. The poorest of the poor who are going and fighting there for ration, they don't have food for tomorrow, they're not afraid. But the very rich, powerful, educated people who have traveled the world, why are businesses so afraid of power? And how many of you believe that businessmen are generally afraid to speak politics?
Well, I think you're right, and the proof of it is every budget speech. Just look at the reactions from those business people who are quoted. Each year, the budget speech is somehow a masterpiece, is brilliantly conceived, is a great thing for the country. Why? I mean, Sriram is totally right. There is a remarkable lack of courage and honesty when it comes to commenting on people in power and policies of people in power. And I think that's simply because in India, the government has an outsized impact on your ability to do your business. It's not true in the West, so you said around the world, it's not true in all Western democracies. I don't find businessmen at all as craven as ours are, because I happen to know a lot of business people, and they're privately extremely sharp, analytical, clever, intelligent in their analysis, but they don't find it worthwhile to say so publicly, because if they do say so publicly, they feel they will invite everything from tax raids to retributive action to possibly even changes of laws that disfavor them and so on. And because in our country, there is a track record of governments misbehaving like this, businessmen are too wise to incur the wrath of government. I mean, it's just too easy to fall afoul of the government, and governments seem to have a very low threshold for their willingness to interfere and misuse their authority to give a tough time to people. I mean, I think, I don't know whether this is an off-the-record event or not, but I think all of us know about a particular company in India that manufactures a particular kind of moving vehicle that underwent a series of extraordinary income tax raids and so on, because it was alleged that one of their major owners had supported a rival political party in elections. Now, this kind of thing obviously sends the chills down business people. When you asked Sriram, you know, who's in business for money? The short answer is everyone is in business for money. And profit is not a dirty word, believe me. I said it's not the most important thing for me, but I certainly think if you're not interested in making a profit, you shouldn't be in business. But the argument that today more enlightened thinkers are making about the purposes of business and their impact on society is what's called the triple P factor. Profit is the first P. If you're in business, make a profit, otherwise you're pretty bad at business, right? But there's also two other P's. One is people and one is planet. And that second P for people is that you have to be good to people you employ, good to the people you sell your products to, and good to the people amongst whom you work. So you can't just be obsessed with making profit at the expense of people. You have to make profit and spend it and use it and do your business in such a way that you also help people, that you're fair to people, you're good to people. And the third is planet, because increasingly in our lifetimes, the consciousness of the environment has truly dawned on us, and we now realize that if we are making profits by dumping toxic sludge into rivers, by spewing poisonous smoke into the air, and that sort of stuff, we are not only hurting the people around us, but we are actually damaging the environment in a way that will hurt future generations to come, and we have a responsibility not to do that. So that profit is fine, it can be number one, but don't forget the number 2P, people, and the number 3P, planet.
So, Mr. Sriram, from the P of politics, we've got 3 more Ps.
I know, well, I'll move on to a different facet. I mean, we've got into the man, the deeper motivations, deeper sense of what drives him. Let me move on to Shashi Tharoor, the writer. Much longer than politician. You know, I first read you about 28, 29 years back, and possibly throughout, and not just the books, but various columns, various. So I'd like to ask you, try and tell us how it feels, what's the difference when you are a writer versus when you are a reader. Both are very solitary affairs. Or you start writing a book, you start reading a book. How does it feel at the beginning? How does it feel at the end? What is the kind of emotion you go through? What's the journey like?
They're actually quite different, because with reading, you are, after all, a receiver of something that somebody else has conceived, put down to paper. It's a finished work. It's been printed, published, vetted through whatever procedures the publishers go through. And then when you settle down to it, it becomes very clear what you're going into. You know what to look forward to. With writing, and especially, I must say, my kind of writing, which is very often interrupted by the demands of so-called real world, I find that very often I have no idea what's coming up. When I start the venture, I will have a broad sense of what I'm trying to write about, but I need to discover what I'm writing in the process of doing it. And so that becomes part of the joy of writing, part of the experience. I mean, in the days when I wrote more fiction, and one day I do want to go back to it, I almost discovered my characters doing things that I hadn't planned 2 days ago that they would do. It suddenly, as the writing came, this seemed to be the natural thing that these characters would do. And that is part of the joy of writing, which is very difficult. You've written novels, so you know what I'm talking about. There's this aspect of discovery, which is difficult to explain. People say, what do you mean discover? You creating this thing, you invented this character, you wrote those words. But somehow the process of creativity has almost its own sort of subconscious engine there. Or maybe there is a stream of invisible consciousness somewhere out there in the ether that you are tapping into when you engage that creativity in you. So when you read, none of that is there, it's already there. It can't be discovered or created.
You stop, pause, have a little conversation with the author.
Oh, I stop all the time because, frankly, I mean, it's a thing about, Dr. Johnson saying hanging in the morning concentrates the mind wonderfully. I'm hanged in the morning a lot because if I'm writing late at night, because next morning I have work to do, completely unconnected to this. So it's often a question of what kind of, one of the reasons I went from fiction to non-fiction is precisely because I was constantly being interrupted by the demands of my work. Initially it was at the UN that it became impossible to sustain because when you write fiction, you're creating an alternative world in your head, right? It's an alternative universe full of its own characters, episodes, incidents, its own assumptions, its own realities. And that's really got to be as real to you for the duration of the story you're telling or the novel you're writing as that of the real world in which you're living, operating on a daily basis. It's like building a sort of glass palace, an illusion in your mind. Now, what happens when you're writing fiction is it has to be sustained, because the reality of that fiction disappears if it's not sustained in your head. But if you're interrupted all the time, if suddenly I'm working in UN peacekeeping, I'm told you've got to go off on an urgent mission because there's a crisis somewhere or whatever, and there I pack up and go. My novel doesn't go with me. I mean, it goes in my head, but I won't have time to attend to it because my head is focused on that particular crisis and preparing for it and reading the files and doing what we used to call the cables about these things and so on. And the net result is there's a big crack in that glass palace. And if you're interrupted 10 times more, the cracks are so much that the palace is shattered and you can't inhabit it again. So my laptop was littered with half-begun and all unfinished works of fiction. And that's when I realized I better stop and just focus on non-fiction, because non-fiction is interruptible. I can write 2 pages tonight, find myself running around campaigning or whatever that I'm not supposed to say, and then 3 days later, 3 weeks later, pick it up, reread the 2 pages I read, remember what I was trying to argue, and then pick up the threads and continue writing. And that's why since 2001, when I published my novel Riot, there hasn't been a novel out of me for another 21 years, and they won't be for a little while, because political life is particularly demanding because you're working 24/7. You have to be switched on all the time. If I'm happening to write an article or a book and some constituent comes with a problem, however petty it may seem, that interrupts, that takes priority. You can't just say, go away, I'm writing. And that's how ultimately you need to write things which can be picked up and recovered from. Is that partly a good enough answer?
It's a wonderful answer. I have just a few minutes left before I rightfully take the mic back to all of you to ask some amazing questions. Quick show of hands. How many of you actually write? No, not the mic, sorry. Still got a few more minutes. How many of you actually write? So all of you go ahead, take inspiration from the man who's written for so long in his life. Write something. You will find it a beautiful experience. You'll find yourself drawing. On the social media, I'd asked people, is there any question I could ask Dr. Shashi Tharoor? And the one that came up repeatedly, and this will be my second last question. Every one of us comes across these wonderful big words we would like to use, but we forget it the next day. And the time we want to write or speak, we just can't remember what was that word that was beginning with G or M or whatever. And how do you actually remember all these things? What do you eat? Now, since he's spoken about fiction, I have put this little fiction challenge for him. Before that, a rapid fire, and then I go to the last question. Quick answers.
By the way, the short answer on that question is, if you use something often enough, you'll remember it, right? So if you read a word and then never use it, you will forget it. It's normal, it's natural. It happens to all of us in any language, including to me.
So do you also forget words in Hindi and Malayalam faster than English?
Do I forget words?
Words in Hindi and Malayalam?
Yeah, I forget words in Hindi and Malayalam. And worse, sometimes when I'm speaking Malayalam, something may come to me in Hindi or vice versa. Or worse still, French may pop up suddenly. Because when you know a few languages, but you don't use all of them equally often, there's this, the mind plays all sorts of silly tricks and one interferes in another. I admire people who manage multiple languages and never seem to make a mistake in any of them. I'm unfortunately not able to claim to be one of those.
So, rapid fire, quick questions, quick answers. Biggest fear in life?
I think honestly of being misunderstood, and that's unfortunately not just a big fear, it's a real fear because I'm very often misunderstood. What can I say? Which
was your, looking back, the most successful movie? When you felt, yes, I've done something extraordinary, of all the amazing things you've achieved in life?
I must say that I'm going to give you first a banal answer and then a slightly political answer. The banal answer is when I first saw my first kids. I had twin boys, so they were my first and only kids. But there was this incredible sense of achievement, which is totally misplaced, because obviously all the credit should go to the woman, and I totally agree. I mean, she's the one who sort of incubated this startup and brought it into the world. But still, there's this incredibly magical sense of achievement. So that's probably the greatest moment. But otherwise, I must say there was one particular achievement in my political life I was very proud of. There was a highway bypass. That is, the existing highway was not adequate. There's a plan to bypass it and construct a new highway from a part of my capital city, Thiruvananthapuram, to the Tamil Nadu border, which had somehow been stuck for 40 years. And I didn't even know about it because when I came in to contest the elections of 2009, people came to me with tears in their eyes saying, "Sir, do you know for 40 years there have been these survey stones on our land, you know, the markers that one day a highway will come, and for 40 years we can't sell our land because people say, why should we buy it? The government's going to take it over anyway. We can't even mortgage the blessed thing. We can't take money against it to get our daughters married." I mean, all of these are real stories. And they were really, so they all, many people said to me, "Please make this project a reality or please scrap it for us. Either will work. Get the project scrapped, we can go on with our lives. But 40 years of a logjam is impossible." And it took me 3.5, almost 4 years of lobbying with successive ministers. Fortunately, my party was in power. It might have been impossible with another party. With successive ministers, with National Highway Authority people, meetings, calling them over, persuading them, 100 phone calls. And at the end of it, I got it done. And what's more, I was political enough to ensure that the first checks to buy the land changed hands before the 2014 elections, because I knew that Congress was likely to lose and that the victorious party would claim all the credit. So I got it done, made sure the check, and then that helped me.
Shubhraji, he said the word
I did.
If you had not been any of the things you have been, diplomat, politician, writer, speaker, and had instead, let's say, taken a career in sports, which game of sport would you have liked?
I think you know the answer to that. I'm a cricket nut. And so I think my passion would have been to be a very elegant batsman, successful sort of off spinner, a tiger in the fields as a fielder, and a brilliant tactician as captain. I used to say to people truthfully, as a kid, I really wanted to play cricket very badly. And that's exactly what I did when I grew up. I played cricket very badly.
So, across centuries, there is this device called an allegory. There is a format of writing, there's a category of fiction writing when there is a regime that is very oppressive, or you live in a context, a country, or a culture where you're afraid of saying some things. And we discussed about how some people fear. So there is another way of saying it without saying it. So given my operative restrictions, what I will do is I'll tell you a little story and leave it halfway and you'll complete it for me. Fiction. And like true Bollywood fan, there is this disclaimer. Any resemblances to living and dead is purely coincidence, and don't intend to hurt the sentiments of any blah 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 yada 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 yada. So this is the story. There is this long ago, far away, once upon a time, a beautiful land with amazing people enslaved by a very demonic regime. And several people tried on their behalf to free that country, but finally one old man with a stick comes, and it's a new movie story I'm trying to write and take his help. And he finally frees it, and then, though he's heartbroken with the results somewhat, he's very happy to see that the next set of people, younger people, have taken over to make this land achieve all the dreams he had. And the person who ruled it first did it reasonably well, made a few mistakes. Then his daughter takes over, and out of respect, they give the name of the old man to her, and then her son comes and both of them are killed, and then the widow runs it, and now she's an old kind of queen, hurt, no longer got the physical strength. All resemblances to reality, past or present, is pure coincidence. We don't wish to hurt anybody. Now, this queen knows that a new kind of force has come against whom you must fight to protect this land for whom you fought then and keep them free, etc. And the prince is a bit... here I'm stealing a character from Shakespeare, Hamlet. He's a little, deep, profound, and therefore, given into different kinds of thoughts. And He's trying hard to do that as well. And the Queen believes a general must be identified to take over the army to help the prince in the larger war next whenever it happens. Now there are two options for general. One who everybody consider is loyal to the Queen and the prince, more loyal than the other person, who I mean, many others believe is the right general who will actually be able to help the prince win the larger battle. Who of these two will go on to be the general? At this stage, in a movie format, consider it the interval.
This is the story of Bahubali Part 1.
This is part one, absolutely, absolutely. And trust me, as an author, I consider it my absolute greatest honor that I'll be co-authoring a book with him. Now the conclusion, part 2, all yours.
So the prince turns to the vast people and says, people, this is your land. Who do you want? You decide. And that's why I'm turning to you and letting you complete the story for Sri Ram.
And now, if somebody could help us with the mic to go around the audience,
Yeah.
would you help us
Mr.
identify?
Sriram, yeah, they will. Yes.
Just so your names are given and then please
So,
direct.
first of all, thank you so much for the fictional story, Mr. Sriram. And as you said, this is Bahubali Part 1, and for Bahubali Part 2, Dr. Tharoor, in all probabilities, I also have the next year's chairperson sitting here. So we can organize another session to hear the second part of the story. And as we progress into the members' Q&A, Gunjan, I would like to open with the young girls who have come as guests today in the audience. We could have the first question from Damya Doshi.
Well, we'll be calling out the names, and please stand up at your place.
Good afternoon, Mr. Tharoor. First off, big fan.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I had two questions for you, if you're willing to answer them, but I'll ask you one of them. So India has recently celebrated Bhagat Singh Ji's 115th birth anniversary, and he started a movement amongst the youth to fight for freedom and encourage them to make sacrifices for the nation's independence. What do you think the youth of today need to do or sacrifice in order to make India a developed nation from one that has been developing for the past 75 years?
Well, you know, obviously he was reacting in a very different time. We had foreign rule, and he chose violence at that time as a means to demonstrate the strength of his feelings. And I would certainly not want today's youth to do that. That's in a free country that really is a disaster, recipe for disaster. But what I would urge is that young people today, first of all, be aware of their responsibilities to the nation, which too many are not, and at the same time, figure out for themselves what is their best contribution, whether it's through their own professions, whether it's through their skills, whether it's through what they do after their working hours in terms of contributing to the well-being of those around them. There are so many ways. I mean, the options available to young people. I've had young people come to me with extraordinary ventures they've started to distribute, for example, leftover food in restaurants to poor people who have nothing to eat. They go around with their own transport, collecting the food, they distribute it themselves, they set up eventually the equivalent of what the Americans call soup kitchens. And the result is that food that would otherwise have been thrown away is actually put to human use, and people who need the food get it. That's one example. But like that, there's so many things people can do. Young people can find multiple ways. I have a couple of young people I know in Delhi who used to go around collecting and then distributing warm clothing to street dwellers in the winter. So you can make an impact in your own way. But somebody else may say, listen, the best way I can make an impact is studying hard in my exams, joining the IAS and being honest in the IAS and trying to actually implement policies that will benefit my people. That's fine too. But all of us should have a sense of the larger purpose to which our life, our profession, our business, or whatever else we're doing serves. As I keep saying, let's measure the worth of our lives by the impact we have on others. And if we can have that, believe me, it doesn't matter what the impact is, we can each help in our own way.
Thank you, Damya.
Thank you.
The second youth fan of Dr. Tharoor in the audience is Krisha Maheshwari.
Hi.
Hi, Krisha.
Hi. So since the last 75 years, we have seen the US dollar appreciating against most of all countries globally. What's the primary reason for this, and how do you see this 20 years down the lane? So basically, what in your opinion can the Indian government do to maybe not have so much of appreciating of the US dollar in Indian rupees?
Sorry, so I didn't fully catch the first half of your question, Krisha. The second part is, what can the government do about the depreciation of the Indian rupee, right? Against it.
So why is the US dollar appreciating so much
Yeah,
over the years, and why is India not able to cope up with it?
Right. And then the first part of your question, same thing?
Yeah, same
Okay.
thing.
So the answer really is that there are factors. Currency is a complicated business, but essentially it relates to perceptions. And the perceptions of how healthy an economy is and what the broader economic trade balances and so on are will guide the value of the currency in international markets. Though the Indian rupee is doing remarkably badly, we are at almost 81.6, I think the last time I checked, against the dollar, some currencies have actually fared worse. So we've depreciated against the dollar by, I think in the last year, something like 8-10%, whereas there are currencies that have depreciated 20%, 30%. The British pound is now practically at level with the dollar. There was a time when the pound was worth more than 2. So every country has a different experience, but it's also at different times that these things happen. We are looking at a time when the Ukraine war has been a factor that's affected many economies. Their currencies therefore get devalued in the process. You're looking at a time when a number of trade flows have been disrupted, so countries whose trade remains strong are able to gain from that. You're seeing economic prospects going down for some countries, so again, speculators will bring the value of their currencies down. And in the case of India, our Reserve Bank has stopped fighting the depreciation because they believe that it may help our exporters to actually export goods more easily because we get more competitive in dollars. In other words, something that, say, was worth a certain amount of money in rupees to manufacture and sell abroad would convert some time ago at, say, 75 or even 70 a year ago, and therefore cost, let's say, $100. Today, the same amount of profit you can make in Indian rupees by selling that abroad at $90. And that $90 item undercuts all the other competitors who are selling for a larger price. And therefore, the government says, let the rupee go down, let the exporters make a success of it. Are Indian exporters able to do so? We haven't found out yet. And maybe they're not. We'll have to see. That's one of the rationales. Now, the government can shore up the rupee by, for example, buying back, by trying to intervene in the markets, by trying to purchase more Indian rupee bonds themselves and so on. They've chosen not to do that, and the Reserve Bank so far is waiting. There are pros and cons. Many would say, let currencies find their own level in the marketplace, even if it involves some volatility, rather than wasting money purchasing currency just in order to keep it afloat. So I would say that though we are criticizing Mr. Modi's government, we the opposition, we're only doing so because Mr. Modi first made an issue of the value of the rupee when he was running in 2014. And the rupee had gone down, I think, close to 50 or 45 or something in those days. And that's what he was complaining about. And he kept saying that when he comes to power, the rupee will become strong again. Well, the rupee has declined a lot more under his rule. The truth is that you can argue that it doesn't matter as much as it seems to matter. That's the only question. Remember in 1947, our currency and the Pakistani currency were the same. They were separated at partition. Today, the Pakistani rupee is about 240 rupees to the dollar. And we are at about 82. So we are looking at a currency that's 3 times worse than we are. And so clearly our economy has, on the whole, done better than that of our next door neighbor.
Thank you. Yeah.
Could we have the next question from Ketna Kanodia? Is Ketna there?
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Tharoor.
Good evening.
So sometime back, we actually also touched upon women on the boards, on corporate boards. And also we talked about how discrimination against women is much less of a policy subject, but more of a culture aspect. Now, what we've realized is with all the enactments coming in, definitely the gender representation on both has increased, but the translation of that into actual practice or actual culture is far away. Like we discussed and we touched upon, it's less to do with policy, more to do with culture, with people. So, not a political question, but in terms of culture, in terms of the country, what can we do about this for situations to be more acceptable around women?
Well, look, I think, though you're right, in a sense, it still is an important first step. Because let's say if somebody is there only because the law requires it, or only because there's a quota, it may start off that way. But if that person, that woman, makes an impact or shows her competence or demonstrates her usefulness on the board, she's actually increasing the motivation for them to appoint more women, and perhaps even more than the one they're required to by quota or by law, because they realize that there's value added. I've seen this in other aspects. For example, in panchayats in Indian governments, in state governments, the panchayats by law have to have either 33% or 50%, depending on the state, of their chairpersons, their presidents, as women. Now, in some cases, women are appointed purely for a token reason. They're often the wives of prominent politicians in that village, and the prominent politicians pulling the strings behind her. And so, in fact, in North India, there's the great embarrassment. They don't even pretend to pull the strings, they just do the job. Just recently, there's a shocking story from, I think it may have been Rajasthan or Bihar, one of these great states in our Hindi belt, where a whole bunch of people were sworn in with the title Pati Pradhan. Because the Pradhan was the woman was sitting in the front row of the audience. The Pati took the swearing in because he was going to be the real guy making the decisions. That's shocking, that's also illegal, but be that as it may, it sometimes ends up in that kind of way. But in most other cases, and I've seen this myself in my state, the woman initially is diffident, looks to the man for guidance, then she realizes the powers of her job, starts exercising it. And believe you me, these women panchayat chairpersons are so much better in many cases than the men. They're also much more honest. They're not corrupt or much less corrupt. They're willing to spend money for social benefits because these are benefits they've experienced the need of in their own lives. And as a result, the voters are beginning to see it was a darn good thing to have that woman in charge. And now that's beginning to change. And now more and more women are having the confidence to exercise this authority. And more men are stepping back and realizing the job is in good hands. So it may start off as a token. The attitudes may initially be exactly as you fear, and as the Pati Pradhan story implies. But then eventually, through experience and through people getting used to it, attitudes can change and will change. We might say must change, because we can't keep on relegating women to the back rooms.
Can I request?
I should mention one thing, that while we're enjoying these questions, I see my assistant waving frantically. I was wondering, because the lights were shining in my eyes, I was wondering what was going on there. He's now emerged. We do have a problem because I have a rather important meeting at 4:15. We had said, our dear Shubhra had told me yesterday I would be reaching my hotel by 4 o'clock. So given that we began a little late, I'm quite indulgent. But if we're going to ask many more questions, I can answer them till about 5 to 4, and then I'll have to rush. Otherwise, all your selfies will be gone. So one last question maybe,
Yes.
and then we can take not solos for 300 people, but certainly we can take a number of pictures in small groups, and then I must rush.
So we'll take the last question and keep the question very brief, please. Hina.
I won't take too much time. Thank you, Dr. Tharoor.
And I'll be glad to be back. I did flow Hyderabad at least once that I remember in 2009 or 10, and I'm quite happy. I think I've done it once more in between. I'll be back whenever you need me. So go on.
I'll take that lead that we wait forward to the next one from you, but I just have one question, and that's my curiosity, is that yes, we saw you speak with a lot of parameters there. You accepted the flow invitation to be with us today, but if you were not subjected to parameters, what was that thought in your mind that I would like to address these women with?
No, I honestly think...
I really would like to hear that from you, because we did see you being under pressure. We accept that, we respect that. But my question to you was, when you accepted flow, we thank you for that. What was the thought that, I'm going to address these acknowledged women with this? I want that heartfelt note from you.
I can tell you truthfully, my basic policy towards women is to talk to them about what they are interested in and what they want to talk about. So I don't actually ever come saying, I want to tell women A, B, and C. I'll say, let me see what the woman wants to know, and I'll be happy to respond. And if she doesn't want to talk to me, that's also fine. But if she has it's really, I mean, honestly, I think the one basic principle I've always had is the woman must be given the choice, whether it's what to wear, whether it's what to eat, what to cook, where to go, what to ask, what to talk about. And that's the basis on which you can have a good relationship with a woman. If you're going to constantly be telling them what to do, you know what I think Priyanka Chopra was recently quoted as talking about mansplaining. There's too much of mansplaining going on in our patriarchal society. So you tell me what you want to talk about and I'll give you the answer.
I just had one more question.
I
The
can.
thing is, you drew our attention, and I think all of us, through the 3 Ps that you talked about. In the new land that Ram talked about, from the fantasy land to the reality land that we hope to see one day, I hope you have policies and strategies to address the 3 Ps that you talked about. And we will see them being implemented and acted upon.
Thank
because
you
that
so
is something that I think all of us were drawn to, and I think that's the need of the hour, the 3 Ps that you talked about. The fear of P being taken away from everybody's mind, the P that talks about equality among everyone, and the P and the policies that will be driven towards saving our planet, that will be addressed to a certain section of business. I'm sure you have strategies, policies that you will do. So
Great.
I'm sure you have certain
So the
strategies
4th P
drawn.
depends on people in public life, and
Well, that
politics
is,
is to deliver those policies.
So I hope to see that being positively implemented and strategies and policies towards that.
Thank you so much. That's
Thank you,
yet
sir.
another P you've been very positive about.
Yeah.
We'll take that forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir, for a very edifying and captivating session. May I request Lalita George to come forward for the autograph sheet? And you could all line up, please, so that we can do a pick quickly for each one of you. I would now
stand there instead of
request
them all coming.
Senior
What do you prefer?
Chairperson,
Prefer them to come.
Senior Vice Chairperson Ritu Shah to deliver the vote of thanks.
A very good afternoon to one and all. There is, in short, no end to the story of life. There are merely pauses. Today's end is, after all, tomorrow's beginning. Everything is recycled in India, even dreams, said Shashi Tharoor. On this note, I, Ritusha, on behalf of Wikiflow Hyderabad, take this opportunity to thank our phenomenal speaker, Mr. Shashi Tharoor ji, for honoring us with his presence today. Sir, we are overwhelmed to have you with us. And my take back today would be, when sharks bite, don't bleed. And the 3 Ps, profit, people and planet. Thank you so much, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Sriram Kari, for this amazing conversation. Much gratitude to our generous sponsors, Platinum sponsor Argentum Arts the Silversmith, Diamond sponsor Freedom Rice Bran Oil, Creative partner RBC. Your support means a lot to us. Thank you, Park, for the warm hospitality extended. Thank you, Press and Media, for the right placement of Flow brand. Immense gratitude to our past chairpersons, our pillars of support. Thank you to all our members without whom nothing is possible. Your presence means a lot to us. India has been born and reborn scores of times, and it will be reborn again. India is forever, and India is forever being made. Thank you and Jai Hind.